Greetings, Hacksters! It is my favorite day of the week, Tuesday Hackster Café, when we get to talk to someone who's doing some really cool stuff with hardware. And this week's guest is Ted Tagami of Magnitude.io, a co-founder of Magnitude.io, as well as chairman of Summer.org, and the education chair for the U.S. National Laboratory, working with the ISS. So cool. Welcome, Ted.
Hey, well, thanks for having me. Hopefully, I can share a lot that gets people excited on the hardware side. Don't know too
Already
much, but
excited. Oh, well, we'll dig into that for sure. First off, would you like to tell us a bit about Magnitude.io and what exactly that is?
oh my goodness. So the name is really kind of influences what we do. We want to make change in education orders of magnitude more than what we see today,
Mm.
and that's bringing learning right to the very edge of discovery. But also cost is a factor if you're getting all the way up to the edge, right? And so we wanted to reduce cost orders of magnitude as well. So it's taken a number of years. We were formed in 2013. And so this we're getting in our 10th year next year. But
Oh,
we've ended up running missions in space, and that can be fairly expensive. But we connect science centers, libraries, museums, and schools around the world to a single mission in orbit, and that's really kind of been what we're noted for today. In 2018, we were recognized with our novel approach, running a single mission that then spreads around the world. So there's an outreach component, there's a research component, there's a little bit of engineering component, which I'll talk about a little later. And actually, I have an open request I'll announce near the end of our
oh,
conversation here.
very exciting. And I hear that you also have another talk that is going out today as well with Katie Coleman, Astro Katie.
Oh, that's right. If this is going on that date, we will
Little
be there
cross
with
promotion.
Katie Coleman. Yeah, and those are when we're on orbit and have operations. We have a live mission in space. We bring our schools and libraries and science centers, whoever they are, around the world in these weekly sessions, so we can get an update on what's happening in space, what's happening with the project, and then we'd like to bring in experts. And so this the last week we had Dr. Joy Amasa, who's basically like the queen of astrobotany, really, down at Kennedy Space Center. And she manages the veggie. You might have heard about either the advanced plant habitat or the veggie, where they're doing most of the research around food production, thinking about
Mm.
crop production for deep space. A really big problem, smartest people haven't solved yet. And then we have our kind of projects we run along as well. And then Katie, earlier today, well, you can see her live. And well, we've watched the recording now, so we'll be recording as well. It's in the future here. I'm
It's
talking
in
about
the
the past. Yeah.
future. We're speaking to you out of the past as though it is the future. Okay.
Ooh,
Anyway. So you do have a live mission right now, which
that's
is
right.
this ExoLab 10. Does that mean it's your 10th ExoLab mission?
It is. Yeah. Our first one, it took a little while. And I've been kind of just moving along where the creative energy was flowing. And I'm going to pull it back to the concept. And so
Mm.
when we formed the company with my co-founder, who sadly passed away at the beginning of this year, Tony So. But Tony was inspirational in getting this thing started. He says, Ted, I can sell advertising in space. Well, hold on a minute. What are you talking about? And satellites had become at that point of commercialization where you could book some time on a satellite and do some cool stuff. And I have some background in brand engagement, global brands, and advertising. And I said, well, Tony, this is really awesome, but we got to do it for something other than advertising. And really, that kind of started in this whole endeavor of looking at cube satellites. These 4-inch cubes or 10 centimeter cubes,
Mm.
volumetrically, you kind of stack them together. You might have heard of Planet Labs, now just planet.com.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
smaller doves, are just 3U or about 12 inches long, about 30 centimeters. Two of those U's or about 20 centimeters is just optics, and then one U is for navigation, and everything else, of course, solar panels fold out. And there's a lot of CubeSats that are in orbit. But the
Mm.
interesting thing about engineering, when you build something like, there you go, right? Something
Mm.
like that, is it gets up in orbit. And if you're in LEO or low Earth orbit, you're up there for maybe a couple years and you have a decay. And they're now forcing us to drop orbits within 25 years. You have a polar orbit, it's going to stay up much longer, apparently. But that orbital inclination, like being deployed off the International Space Station, you have a couple years.
Mm.
But the idea here is these. Here's a version of this
Ooh.
like a 10 centimeter cube, just an aluminum box, really all it is. It's the shell, like the carapace, if you will, of what was inside. And this is like that 40-foot container on the back of that 18-wheeler on the highway that's kind of blocking your exit, or
Mm.
the rail car or the ship on the ocean. This is intermodal transportation for space. right? And so this for me was the breakthrough. The idea now we're in the 21st century. This is available where you can fill up. You have to think inside the box, literally fill these up with your mission, and it could be a satellite in orbit. In this case, we get them sent up on either a Northrop Grumman Cygnus resupply or SpaceX Dragon resupply mission. They take us out of the flight bag. The astronaut floats over and takes us out of the bag. They go over to a locker, and it looks kind of like a computer rack. They flip down the opening and they pull out a big old data card. They'll attach this to the data card and they'll slide it back in and basically boot
Whoa.
us up, right? And then they float away, and then our mission is underway. I'm getting all the telemetry. I don't need to worry about orientation. I don't need reaction wheels or star trackers or anything like that. And I don't have to worry about power or plug in. I don't need to worry about data outside of obviously delivering it to the end pipe, and
Oh,
all
yes,
that
this is
comes
like a
down to the
huge
nest.
carrier board for your tech.
Right, yeah. And so it's basically it's like a barnacle on a whale. Right. And so all our missions is I want to get to the lunar surface here in the coming decade. Kind of a voyage to Mars is in the works. Basically, think about like a barnacle on the big whale, right? Just need
Love
to
that.
plug in and go along for the ride. And under education, there's a lot of opportunities that allow us to do that.
I just got excited because I had a piece of art go up on one of the Planet Labs doves,
Oh
like,
yeah,
years ago,
there
when
you
they were
go.
still Planet Labs, and it,
Yeah,
like,
art's so
orbited for a
important.
year.
That's when the machines and
Art
the
in space.
algorithms and everything. Oh, look at this. This is
Mine was the one
beautiful.
on the left,
This was actually on the solar panels, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
They
there you
had a
go.
little collaboration with Pier 9. Anyway,
Yeah, this is so beautiful. There you go. That's
love
a
it.
3 equivalent. How fortunate for you to actually have something in orbit like that.
I love it so much, and since you said that you're, a classically trained artist, I think it's so interesting. There's so much to talk about there, and how that informs your interaction with space.
It's performance art at this point, honestly.
Mm.
So we're event driven. Again, 10 missions. So we had this cadence, which is honestly ridiculously too fast. We've broken a lot of stuff.
Ugh.
But it's also created heritage where we have a project with the United Nations now, project with the government in Australia, New South Wales government, and it's kind of gotten a little bigger, which is pretty neat. And all really to benefit, whether it's just pure inspiration for our youngest or perhaps deep research for our older folks that are involved. I like to say K to
Mm.
gray. It doesn't matter what
Huh?
age you are. I think we can get excited and involved in a mission. And there are different segments for kind of how, the level of engagement and maybe capacity for knowledge and understanding.
I was curious about that because on the ExoLab's page, you mentioned that it's suitable for grades elementary, middle school, high school, and university.
That's
And
right.
I'm curious about how, like, the way they engage might be the same or different across
Well,
those
there you
age groups.
go. And so, you know, when we thought about the ExoLab, and so the ground unit, I'll share the hardware here. It looks like
Woo!
this, right? And I can break it apart and do a kind of a just the different components. It's actually quite straightforward. But this is basically mimicking our original size. I'll take the cover off so you can just see it. So just imagine like 8 inches taller, 20 centimeters by 10 by 10, and just carbon dioxide sensor, little pinhole here for temp and humidity, light sensor here, a camera. Back plane here is just a Raspberry Pi,
Hmm.
right? LCD display is telling us what's going on. It's Wi-Fi enabled. So this networks with all the other networks and the mother experiment in orbit,
Wow.
right? But originally, when we built this concept, when I kind of sketched out and said, "Hey, engineers, can you really make this real for me?"
Hmm.
I wanted to do not just well, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So plants was among many of the things that we wanted to do, but I was looking at like microfluidics because surface tension over supersedes everything when it gets to like what water does in space. Thermal, right? You don't have convection. Heat doesn't rise
Right.
in space, right? And so a lot of things that we kind of take for granted here are quite unusual up there. That's why there's so many investigations in biology, in pharmacology, in material science. And so I was excited about like entomology, like what bugs do.
Oh.
If I had a cocoon, what a chrysalis, or whatever, what would happen, right?
Hmm.
Think about like an ant farm or something like that, and then think about things like crystallography. As many of your viewers probably know, in microgravity, you can form pure crystals. There's some
Mm.
folks actually looking to create fiber optic cable with a lower occlusion rate, so you
Hmm.
have much greater distances or higher throughput without those diffractions happening. All those things are pretty amazing, right? They haven't solved that yet. Apparently, the Z band, I think that's what it's called, is pretty brittle. And so they got to work through that, but they're getting really clear optics. So there's so many things you can do. And the lab was really kind of an imaginative thing. If we can run these labs up to space, what could we do? How does it benefit humanity, both off world and on world? And then everyone said, Ted, this sounds great, but you got to focus. ADD, kicks in. And so it's plants. It's a life form. They require a lot less than, say, if I want to fly a mammal, like a mouse or something. And plus, you feel a
Mm.
little bad if the mouse isn't doing as well as you'd hope. Plants, on the other hand, it's like, oh, well, the plant didn't make it. What can we learn from it? But back to your primary question, if we think about our youngest students, it's like, how does a plant grow, right? And oh, we're
Yeah.
connected to space, so there's a big wonder thing. And they get into things like cycles, like the carbon cycle. There you go, or and sequestering carbon. All plants can do that. Trees are probably going to do a better job, but there's some interesting things around the particular plants we're flying on this mission, alfalfa, and an ancient ancestor of alfalfa. And so
Oh.
we focused on the plants, and that's really been for our youngest ones. We now have a workbook, coloring book we got a grant for,
Oh,
which
that's
we
cool.
published in February. It's bilingual, and it follows the journey of a little astro rabbit on the way
Oh.
to space, and stuff goes bad, stuff goes wrong, right?
Oh no.
Yeah, and so it's got to actually solve the problem. It's got to engineer its way out of it. And of course, the rabbit likes alfalfa seeds, or alfalfa
Oh
has
yeah.
these seeds. And so these students here, like K to third grade, maybe, will be doing some reading. Literacy is a big issue for school systems because of the pandemic. Reading comprehension's down. And if you can't read, it's hard to communicate.
Mm.
It's hard to do science and engineering. So really want to focus on that. As you
Especially
get up towards
online.
high school, then you're getting more into like AP and environmental science type stuff, earth science types of engagements, and mathematics. And at the university level and the research level, you're getting into what we are actually studying, and then your post flight research, which includes two different things on this particular mission, ExoLab 10, in which we'll be using hard X ray tomography. And I didn't know what that was a few months ago. Uh,
Hmm.
and single cell transcriptomics. Again, very thin, a lot of words, and I know a little bit, but
Hmm.
bring the experts in to really share about. And I can describe either one of those to you in layperson's terms. But that graduate kind of postdoc research enables us to think about how these organisms can behave in environments unlike Earth, and perhaps for this long distance voyage to Mars, or perhaps building a settlement on the moon, or maybe even on Mars in the future. But whatever we can uncover there, hopefully we can also bring back here to Earth. And that's one of our projects with the UN, is thinking about sustainability.
Yeah, there's been a lot of overlap recently. I went to an analog astronaut conference earlier this year. You're probably
Mm.
familiar with,
Oh, yeah.
and it's this same kind of idea being spread there, where the Earth is like a really big spaceship, and
It
like all
sure
the like
is. Yeah.
life support systems. What we're trying to do is like preserve life support, literally, and it's the same kind of stuff. Carbon sequestration, like air recycling, and like maintaining biodiversity, letting things grow, and supporting life in space, which is literally what the planet does as well.
Right,
And
right.
it's
It's
such an
pretty
amazing
hard
parallel.
with the biggest difference that is, I'm understanding it as a layperson,
Mm,
is Mars and the moon are our nearest candidates here, at least during my lifetime. It's dust and rock, right?
right.
Here on our planet, we literally have soil that's alive, mycorrhizal fungi, bacterias, things that are healthy and things that are unhealthy, but it's all living in this dynamic world, living soil, and that we're degrading that right now. The process we use for high production farming, it does an incredible job to produce food, and it's coming at a cost. Often we're using
Mm,
the petroleum-based Haber-Bosch process to create artificial fertilizer, synthetic fertilizers, which really ramp up production, but it depletes the soil's capacity for long for over time. According to the UN, we got about 30 years of fertile topsoil left on the planet.
wow.
Right? That sucks, right? That's not, you want to go to Mars. Hold on a minute. That's fine, but let's figure out what we're doing right here. And can we address that? And there are different parts of the world that can do it more readily. Trying to build something in, let's say, in the Mojave or sub-Saharan Africa is going to be a big challenge. It's basically very high temps, and it's sand, right? How do you bring
Mhm.
the life back into it? And so those are a whole different category, a whole different thing of thinking about. But it is back to that wetware, right? Not the hardware, not the software, but the
Yes.
biology, which is a very complex thing. And bioengineering, I think, is a fascinating field. But I can talk more about the hardware. I can do a little breakdown here about our ExoLab. I can pretty much talk about whatever you want to.
Oh, there's so many things, that I'd love to ask you about, but let's see. Let's start with, this is ExoLab 10. So, presumably you've done a bunch of like you said, you confirmed, you've done a bunch of missions before.
Mhm.
How has this one informed and improved upon the previous versions? Did they have different types of missions that you were doing? Different tech?
Oh, absolutely. So our hardware that goes in space is a higher fidelity than what we have on Earth. Again, we're looking at lower cost and broader distribution. And
Mm.
the dates are a little wrong in this. We actually ended up going, we were delayed like three different times. We
Oh
actually
my.
went to orbit at the very end of November.
Mm.
And we'll be up there until January 13th, I believe, in which we'll be packed up and sent home. But,
Cool.
so there have been hardware. If you look at bifurcating this, there's been a hardware path for improvement, and there's also just like biological life-sustaining path we're taking. And then why are we studying the biology? So, Dr. Ron Shigeta is a brilliant man that really guided us in the early days, back when there was something called Berkeley Biolabs, just
Hmm.
down the street from us here. We're in Berkeley on 6th Street. They were down on 4th Street, and they were doing like bioreactors and stuff like that, and looking at genetic code. And it was just opened like a hacker space for bio, which is totally awesome. And early days, this is like 2016. He basically said focus. And so when we're going to study organisms, apparently there's something called a model organism, depending on the type of thing you're looking at. So
Mm,
you might think
right.
about like the fruit fly is a model organism, or
Yeah.
the mouse, right, for humans, or even like the pig.
Or the
Uh,
HeLa
and
cells
for
or
plants as a whole, there's something. There's a plant, basically kind of a weed. It's a part of the mustard family called the Arabidopsis thaliana or A thaliana. So they said, start with that. It's a small plant. It grows really fast. It self pollinates, creates its own flowers. Little siliques develop with these amazing little tiny seeds. And so we started with that in our first three missions. And our first mission, we literally roasted our seeds in orbit.
Oh, no!
It's pretty sad. And we had on an
That's so sad.
agar medium, so like a gel medium. It's basically almost all water. It's just a suspension there with basically made from seaweed. Yeah, Athalia, you're really fast with your searches. That's great. Speed searching. And so Athaliana is a model organism for just general plant biology. And so we're just playing around, right? But we did three of those. And then we said, all right, really, what's NASA doing? Because we're kind of this appendage here. We probably want to start lining up with what everyone's focused on, as I'm kind of reacquainting myself with what the state of the art could be versus
Mm.
when I was a little kid watching them go to the moon in the 60s and 70s, right? It's like, okay, this is real. I'm actually getting involved now. And so we looked at the microgreens that NASA had been flying, whether it was uh, red lettuce or whether it was like wasabi or whatever what they were growing,
Wasabi, interesting.
Chinese cabbage. So for the next two missions, we ran some of those, and these are short missions, so we're not seeing full development. We're not seeing something that we can produce crop from, but we're looking at the behavior of these plants in early germination to try to understand how they might behave. And
That's
up to
so
this
interesting.
point, we really weren't doing any post flight research at the caliber that we're at right now. But the hardware has continued to improve, and we went from that 8-inch tall by 4x4 up to this 30 centimeter 12-inch by 8-inch by 4-inch. So it's a 6U equivalent. Six of those little red cubes that I showed you is the current
Uh-huh.
size. And so from that, we actually, one of our teachers out of New York was a farm boy in Iowa. He said, and again, I have a lot of naivety here. There's a 12-year-old trapped inside this guy.
Mm.
And he's saying, hey, when we were on the farm, we'd have this intercrop, and maybe all your listeners already know this, but and they'd plant it in between, and these legumes, whole class of plants like your chickpea and soybean and green bean, clover, alfalfa, have this wonderful relationship with a bacteria that fixes nitrogen out of the atmosphere.
Ooh.
Almost all plants do not do this, and nitrogen is one of those three things, major things that a plant needs. In addition to potassium and phosphorus. Of course, just good soil as a whole might need well drained or whatever. Different plants need different things. And so this amazing bacteria, these cynorhizobia, are living in the soil. And there's others. There's Azotobacter, and it was another one, but the Cynorhizobia is the one we've been focused on. And they do this amazing little dance down in the rhizosphere in the roots of the plants. So a plant like a soybean or whatever soy a plant is doing the photosynthesis thing, right? It's creating energy and it's
Is it?
converting it down into sugars and it gets down into the roots. Again, layperson's description here. And the bacteria is in the soil, it's doing its thing, and it really needs the sugar to grow. And it's capturing nitrogen out of the soil wherever it can get it. And that literally it infects the roots. The plant will literally go out and grab the bacteria and bring it into the body. And these cysts develop.
Oh.
That's it in Safer. Yeah. And these cysts develop and these nodules form. And inside these nodules are nitrates and nitrites. The plant converts to ammonia. Boom. It's got its own agricultural kind of replenishment there. So this is cool. Our missions have evolved from thinking about that cowpea then, and we've stuck them with legumes. We call our plants leguminauts.
Woo!
And so
I
this
love
is the
that.
10th mission with legumes. And now we've kind of jumped to this level here in mission 10. It's much higher fidelity in terms of post-flight research. So we've got that amazing relationship. We're looking at carbon sequestration. How might plants capture carbon from the atmosphere? And for our younger students, it's definitely for them to understand the value. Without plants, humans and mammals wouldn't be here. And without mammals, honestly, plants probably couldn't survive as well. We're exhaling CO2, that plants absorb that. They exhale oxygen. We need that. Wonderful relationship we have with plants. And we can't just let them go away. Mars is a big problem, obviously, since there's no plants. What are you going to do?
Yeah.
Right? You bring your canisters, right? Or you're going to dig and you convert, and it's going to be chemistry. And maybe that'll happen.
Potatoes.
Potatoes. So there you go. Okay, Mark Watney. But exactly. Um, so at the conclusion of this mission, when it gets back to Earth, we're actually before they come back home, we'll fix them in orbit because we don't want them. They've germinated. They were just seeds we sent up. We sent them up cold, 4 degrees Celsius. We installed them on station, and then they basically warmed up and they germinated. And it looks like all the tubes are germinated now. And I can send you some, or maybe even flash. I'm not as quick as you are with the
Mm.
stuff, but if I can share a screen, maybe I'll do that,
Oh,
or
for sure.
edit it in. But these we've got 6 tubes running, a couple with just the alfalfa, and then 4 of them with this ancient ancestor, Medicago truncatula. M. truncatula is a model organism, just like the Arabidopsis, but just for legumes. And
Mm.
the alfalfa broke away from Medicago truncatula about 8 million years ago, plus or minus, maybe a couple million years. I don't know how they figured that out. That's when it happened, but that's what I've understood. And there's just a ton of research around this plant because it is a model organism. If we just want to study these protein heavy plants that work with these nitrogen fixing bacteria, which
Wow.
can rejuvenate soil. So if we want to boot up living soil on another world, maybe this is what we're going to need. Bring along some bacteria and boot it up. I think we're going to literally need to bring some earth with us too.
Yeah, that
Now,
makes
what's
sense.
that going to look like? And that's
Mm.
obviously very, very expensive.
I
Humans are
love.
squishy, right? All this stuff is squishy, and it's
Yeah.
going to be a big problem. Robots, I think, for the next couple of days, decades, are going to be like the way to go as we try to figure out this bigger problem.
Absolutely, those dirty, dangerous, and dull tasks that were going to be in so much uh, very ample variety in space. It's so interesting, you hear people thinking that, oh, it's okay if like Earth goes under because we'll just go to the moon or Mars. But like, do you realize how much harder it will be to
That's
like
right.
start from scratch there versus
Yeah,
like here where we can like we've got some leeway here or
there you
like a
go.
foothold here like even even if it gets real bad, it's still going to be easier to like rejuvenate this planet than it is going to be to like escape to
Yeah,
space where like
yeah.
there's nothing.
Well,
Um,
exactly right. And what's really cool is if we look at that what you're prescribing, which I'm a full proponent on, we actually solve the world's problems and we start realizing what's required to live off world.
mm,
In a way, we're not mature enough as a civilization, right? Type zero civ, right? Eventually, we're going to get there, but we're still killing each other. We're still doing
mm,
crazy stuff like equities and things like that. So until we can kind of be more like Star Trek, I think we're kind of farther away from really making it. And always pushing the envelope, always pushing the edge. I think that's required. But we also have to have some humanity in this process. Whoever says let's just go to Mars and say, here, I'll give you 5 tons of equipment, and you got to go live in the desert and make it work. right? It's like,
Yep.
let's see what happens, right? So here, there's your analog astronauts right there, right?
Yeah, we do have some interesting stuff going on with people like making these multi-container systems where it's like you shrimp on one on the bottom level and you got like algae and or I guess
Aquaponics.
shrimp would be higher up in tilapia and stuff, and
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
These
Hydroponics
closed
like this.
systems. Yeah, there's a, I'm really fascinated about, and that's some of the work we're going to be doing with the United Nations. It's called the
Ooh.
Opportunities for Youth in Africa. And this is Zambia, South Africa, Senegal, Kenya, Nigeria, Morocco, and there's more, but that's who's in it right now. And the idea here is food and sustainability and self-reliance. You're looking at the things like vertical farming, aquaponics, systems like that. So the technology that we're looking at in space has a immediate benefit here on Earth if we're looking at it in a different way, right? So
Mm.
lighting regiments, we call it like lighting recipes, things like that.
We'll put the link in the description as
There you
with
go.
most of these.
Yeah, that's the one.
Cool, cool, cool,
Yeah, yeah.
cool.
Really amazing. Great work. And we're just kind of a little bump on the log right there. And hopefully we can make something that's more beneficial, not just for space, but for self reliance. And entrepreneurialism is a big part of this as well. Right now, yeah, there a lot of it's like import stuff, and there's or just a few people control supply chain and things like that. So how do you build capacity and other things like that? I think really really important stuff. And then you work along with alternative credit methods and things like that.
Mm.
Micro lending and all that stuff is new to me. All this stuff is everything's new to me. It's just to get yourself in trouble and find smart people to help you out, right?
Yeah, I think that's why
That's
it's the definition of like being in the right room. If you're the most experienced or the smartest person in the room, then you're in the wrong room. Like you're clearly like
I'm
jumping on all these things that are like,
Yeah,
making sure that you stay
dumbest
afloat.
guy right here. It's like, there's I have a certain level of knowledge and I think self confidence of who I am as a person, but I also understand that the gravity of some people's interest and knowledge in any particular
Mm,
field. And so, especially with their postdoc researchers, they look through the world like this. They know that one thing extraordinarily well.
mm,
And sometimes they have a wider field of view, but often you get to the edges there and they can't see anything. It's like that's not what they're interested in. And I'm kind of like 360-degree view and I
yeah.
can't focus on any one thing. But when I find someone that has that expert view, I can then be like, hey, can you help us? And so I think what we've been able to do at Magnitude is bring in a legion of people that are really, really good at some stuff.
Yeah, I think that's where that metaphor kind of breaks down where it's not about like smarts really. It's like you're kind of a generalist and you have this broad view, like you're saying, and sort of breaking out of not being in a particular silo and
Mhm.
staying coherent with research and stuff. It's so cool. Okay, what were I had like 15 other questions. Let's see, where should we go?
You're like me
um
right there. We'll just feed questions at each other.
Well, you mentioned earlier that you've done a lot in a short period of time, and you've also broken a lot. And there is this, current phrase of like move fast and break things. And I don't necessarily always agree with that, but also like it's a great way. It's also very important to iterate. And where do you think that balance lies? What's your philosophy there?
Wow. Well, I have a high level of risk, I guess, a risk component.
Mm,
And also from a social perspective, if there is a air quotes here a failure, I don't really look at it that way. Of course, I don't want to not have it work the way I expected it to. So you want to do everything you can, but I don't over measure. I don't over try to quantify something. If it feels pretty good and we're basically moving in a forward vector, hopefully pretty narrow, like 15 degree,
mm.
but not 2 degrees, that we're moving in the right direction.
Such
And
a
as
space
long as we can
metaphor.
move forward, it's really important. And that sometimes people just want, what they say, analysis to paralysis. They just
Mm.
have to make it all exacting and right. And, there's good reason to do that. I probably need to do more of that, honestly. And kind of just thinking about when we do things. I know this is really more of a hardware thing, and so if you'd like, I can also break down a little bit what we're at, and it also kind of leads me to what I want to be able to do in the future.
Oh, definitely, because we had this interview with you at Maker Faire in 2018, almost
Oh my
exactly
gosh,
4
there you
years
go.
ago.
Yeah, yeah.
And, your hardware looks very different now. This is what
Well,
it
yeah,
looked
for
like back then.
sure. Sure. What you see right there is the CAMSAT, which has an interesting origin. It was the precursor to the CubeSat, which we
Mm.
now are Cube Labs and what we're flying. So the CubeSat actually came from Stanford. There you are, right on with your wonderful robot.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, looks like I've aged since then. More
Yeah,
white.
we all have.
Yeah,
Aged
but
about
the
10 years
idea of a
later.
CanSat, professor at Stanford, Professor Bob Twiggs, this is the late '90s. His students are building a satellite the size of about a dorm room refrigerator, right? And that was a small
Mm,
satellite back then.
wow. Yeah.
And the kids were kids. The Stanford students were not completing it by the time they're graduating. Some frustration going on, what have you, and they had their peers kind of completing it. And so Twiggs is at a conference in Hawaii. This is well before my time of getting involved in space again. And he just holds up one of his soda cans. He loves Pepsi, though there's a pitch there. So he's just holding up this can saying, "Can you put a satellite in this?" Everyone thinks he's nuts. But really, what he wanted the students to do is do some PCB board design, build some software, and get a high iterative rate of design. They went out to the Black Rock Desert, the same place as Burning Man. In fact, the week after Burning Man, they launched big rockets. They opened the ceiling to 400,000 feet. And so if you're
Wow.
Burning, I've never been to Burning Man, which is crazy. I should go one year. But the week after, you stick around, you go just a little further north, and they're launching super big rockets. That's actually the
Whoa.
first time I met Elon was there.
Is
That's a
that an
different
annual
story.
thing?
But so they went out to the desert with these soda cans with these simulated satellites in them, and they put them in rockets. They only went up a couple miles, and you gotta technically you need to get up above 62 miles to be in space, and you have to be traveling across the surface of the Earth really fast in order to get to orbit, more than 17,000 miles an hour
Mm.
in order to get to orbit. So these are just little parabolic flights. But what happened is when it reached apogee and the CanSat got ejected, its hang time under parachute was about equivalent to horizon pass of an actual satellite. Boom. Students
Wow.
were getting all the design thinking in there, or radio controls, all that stuff in a very short window, which is great for just thinking about what you can do. CanSat.eu is an annual contest in the European Union, and any college students that are interested, maybe even high school, from the states or from anywhere else around the world, can go there. They can't compete, but they can just kind of come along as camaraderie or friendship and show what they've done. And there are 3D printing shells. They each year they have a certain thing that they need to do, and so that was really a great way. And what you saw there in 2018 in New York was a pre-designed unit for classrooms. And so a shield sitting on top of just an Arduino Uno, we
Mm.
cram barometric pressure, temperature, relative humidity, light, GPS, real-time clock, a light sensor, packed it all on there for under $100.
All
And
these
just like,
different
yeah, and it had all its sensors and what have you. And so it was just great for the students. Again, this is like middle school or high school to learn how a system worked. In a way, we wanted them to study phenomena and measure phenomena. And in a way, it was like going to an advanced math class, and bells ringing every 50 minutes in a typical school, so 55
right.
minutes. And so the teacher's a little overwhelmed. And it's like going to an advanced math class and saying, "Okay, guys, we're going to need a calculator for this class, and you're going to build one." It's a math class, right? And why are we building our calculator? And so, in a way, although engineering and science was kind of leading this, we thought we'd lead with the phenomena first, back into the engineering. And of course, since it's open and it's you can write your sketches and what have you, and those are all available. Then someone could take that as a starting point. If you noticed on the shield here, well, I've got one here. That it's got some breakouts. So it's got two analog, two digital, and an I squared C port on there
Oh, there it is.
and stuff. And so you can add to it, and it doesn't need to be in this form factor. We had some folks like the CubeSat. We work with the Department of Ed, and they had the CubeSat challenge a couple years ago. So we just printed up a little 3D printed shell. Just
Oh,
some
cute.
hardware's in there, but you got a whole volume to work with, and so you want to add other stuff like a radio or maybe an actual experiment. Again, simulation, launch it in a rocket, a 6-inch airframe this can just fit in, and even though it's a 4-inch cube, or maybe a high altitude balloon. So we've done quite a number of those. But really, where our passion is and our focus now is on these labs as we think about humanity, sustaining humanity here on Earth, but also adventuring beyond. It's the
Mm.
labs and what we're doing on Earth. That connection is what we've got going on. But basically, what we've done is, we've designed our own format. So we just like have these aluminum frames made. These are vacuum formed pieces that we assemble and glue here together. Heat treated fasteners here for the screws for the cover
Mm.
plate. The board itself, really simple design. You saw what it looked like in the front cover. I mean, it's just a real simple board design, right?
Oh,
Here,
yeah.
yeah, here in the back. It just and just we got a, you just plug a Raspberry Pi right in the back, just like that.
Ah.
Of course, it's got the Pi camera, and it's super simple config, right? This is an I-squared C port, and so one thing I'm hoping to do from a design or engineering thing is we want this to be backwards compatible with the next generation unit. If you look this just on the side here, this elevation, I've got this wonderful space in here which I could probably add additional sensors. Since this is an I-squared C port, I can daisy chain some stuff back down in here, and I can do other stuff. So that's just in here. These are all ambient. They're not controlled environments. They'd be far too expensive.
Mm.
And this is just this is an expired experiment, but let's see, get this, why is that?
Expired.
Yeah. So this experiment, basically
Oh,
these tubes, these are just old tubes, but they go in the lab like this.
oh, cool.
And so this is what the students are running. So there's your wetware inside your hardware
Oh,
plate, right? And so that's what it is. But I want to blow open this form factor, and I want to do some other things around higher quantifications of this, and maybe changing the light recipes, different lighting systems.
hmm.
I am looking for an embedded engineer. Big
Ah.
shout out right there.
How do they get in touch if they want to
Oh,
help?
just Ted at magnitude.io. I'm hoping that you're actually in the Bay Area because I don't know a lot about this. I want to learn a little bit, but I'm going to get out of the way. And I'm looking for a real creative person, a polymath. I hope. I like the original folks that worked on our development for this product. And my that seat's empty right now, and I want to put this in place with some prototyping in 2023 for production in 2024. And we've got
Yeah,
the right
oh,
connections
yeah.
with getting to space. There'll be 3 commercial
Mhm.
space stations in orbit by the back end of this decade. We're going back to the moon with the Artemis missions. And just think about as a barnacle on the whale if you think that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
And even as a side gig, I know if you're really good at what you do, you can probably just do this as kind of a fun project on the side. And you just think about students around the world, like in Sri Lanka, or in Senegal, or in like Romania, or in Germany, and Canada, Japan, a bunch of them here in the States that get connected to our missions and can experience the work that your hand might help in crafting. So that was my my pitch there. Would love to find that brilliant person that's local here in the San Francisco Bay Area. We're based in Berkeley. Probably work remote, but I think it would be helpful. We're a full remote office for the most part. Our software stack is all remote, but that hardware there, just kind of get a sense of it, and for me to learn a little bit, I think is important.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
it is an education company, and I think as the leader of that, I want to be in front, trying to learn also, right?
Yeah. So this is so inspiring and motivating, and I'm curious, working with students, what do you find is the most inspiring and motivating for them? Like, is it working on something physical? Because these often, as you mentioned, have sort of long time scales, which can be hard to have like an instant gratification kind of thing, especially with the
Right,
internet, you
right.
know.
Well,
Um,
this is interesting question, and it does rely on the learner. I think the challenge we have with our current public education systems, and many private and charter schools are the same way. You've got the schools that are different, but for the most part, most schools follow this thing that everyone does the same thing, and this is what you're focused on.
mm,
And I've gotten to be a good friends with a professor out of the Royal College of Art, a Professor De Leon, and he likes to say that you should find your mission, not your major. So what's that thing you really want to do? Oh, you
mm.
wanted a skirt that lights up when you spin around. Okay, how do I build it, right? Or you want a little robot on your shoulder, or you want to put something in space. You start with the thing, and then you're like, well, how do I do that? And then you learn, and that's how I wasn't a good kid in school. It's kind of bad actually, but
Same.
it was the thing that I got excited about, and I wanted to learn how to do it. And if you start with that, then you're on the way to finding your career, your passion, the thing that you do well. And so for this word gets tossed around a lot now, transdisciplinary.
Hmm.
But the world of tomorrow requires, I like to say we're assembling superheroes.
Hmm.
Any good, like an Avengers or Justice League kind of scenario, you're bringing different talent together to solve the big problem. The universe is at stake, right? And everyone has their own superpower. And so if I'm in a classroom or I'm doing remote co-teaching with somebody, we're thinking about, oh, you like social media. In fact, you've got Instagram followers and this and that. Well, you're going to be our communications person, right? Or communications team, because there's a couple people to do that. Oh, you're really into software program, great. You're a software engineer and hardware engineer, right? Design. Oh, who's the program manager? And we let people kind of fall into those little roles. And it depending on the age of the students and the capacity, often we ask them all to have a primary. They're all kind of do something very similar because it's the mission, right? But then they branch off to the thing that they love. So it's across disciplines. And to really reinforce that, everyone's heard of STEM, right? Science,
Mhm.
engineering, and math. Art guy in there, right? So I need my A. But STEAM, what's that? I just rearranged all the letters,
Hmm.
Alex. And so we like to spell teams with the T, right? Technology, engineering, art,
Oh.
maths, and science, because some of the biggest problems we have in the world will require a team effort in which I'm bringing a biologist and a chemist and a hardware engineer and someone that understands quantum computing or whatever, and we get together and we solve that thing. And so that's what I get excited about.
And you mentioned this on the summer.org page,
Yeah.
the
This little
intersection of
guy
these
is
different
dormant.
disciplines.
So it's a seed that it germinated a little bit, it produced some seeds, and it's kind of quiet again.
This one?
When Tony and I co-founded these companies, I wanted to be a nonprofit, and Tony wanted to build a unicorn, a billion
Mm.
dollar education company. Magnitude was the attempt to do that, the unicorn, and summer was this feeling, and that's the feeling I got during summer. Was it was open learning? There wasn't any kind of conditions. Did it feel good? Catching tadpoles in the creek or whatever,
Mm.
going to the library and looking for a book to read, and it was really open ended learning, kind of like Montessori or something. And so they were founded at the same time. And Summer is a registered 501c3 nonprofit. It's quiet right now, and I need to reactivate that. Its mission is actually to stem learning loss. I want to rephrase that a little bit now because of what's happened with the pandemic. Is everyone talks about learning loss, and I've come to this, and I'm still working through the thought process on this. But I think there's a lot of pressure we're putting on younger people, especially that you're not where
Mm.
you're supposed to be. You're behind.
Mm.
It's like screw that. They're exactly where they're supposed to be right now. Because who would have expected a pandemic? Now that we accept where we are, where would we like to go is a much better way to look at it. But Summer's idea was to, as you look, especially communities of color and underserved communities, year over year, it compounds from like pre-K all the way up through high school, if they can even get to university. There's a gap of learning. And we get that during the summer months. Years and years ago, maybe in high school or whatever, and you come back in the fall, and it's like, oh, I've forgotten that. And
Mm.
it takes a little while to learn it again. So there's a natural gap because you just haven't been doing it. And there's a bigger gap for these underserved communities. And so the idea of Summer was to remove that gap. But
Especially when you get into like the age where people are doing sort of unpaid internships, and that's definitely something that only certain people can sort of afford to do.
right, right. Yeah, all our internships have always been paid. If there's
Nice.
any high school or college student that is looking for a summer internship, if you've got what we're looking for, which is pretty much a self starter with a little bit of moxie, and we can
Mhm.
find a place for you, whether it is in brand engagement or whether it's in hardware, whatever it is. Always looking for that. Berkeley is right in our backyard here, so that usually a community that serves us well, but always kind of open. And we've had some amazing graduates that have come through. Planetary scientist
Ooh.
coming right out of Berkeley was actually the polymath that developed the prototype for ExoLab.
Oh,
He
cool.
was with us for a couple years, and then he said, I'm really starting to like this hardware and software stuff. I'm going to go out and get a mechatronics degree." Now he's a lead engineer at a different company.
Wow.
We had a junior in high school that came to us when we were working at his high school in San Leandro, and he had his club, his little computing club, and they wanted to join us in these missions we were working on, launching a high altitude balloon. And then he was interested in maybe some internship work. Well, he ended up, going through high school, getting his degree at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Now he's working on a battery startup storage company in his hometown.
Wow, cool.
Yeah, it's great to watch young people come through. It is an education company, right? And even our older folks, we had a career educator, and the pandemic hit, and she said, "You know what? I quit. I'm not going to deal with this." She was in a community that was very fractious about that mask, no
Mm.
mask in, no in. And so she said, "I'm not going to deal with it." And then she said, and we picked her up, and she was working with us for a while. And she says, "I'm going to go get my master's degree." So she's getting her master's degree while she's working with us. She's working at Space Force now. So,
Cool. Wow.
right. So yeah, it's a journey, right? And
Mm.
we hope that whether someone's in us for a little jam session, I like to think about everything we do as kind of like jazz music. Coming in, we just do a jam sessions, and maybe they're good, maybe they're not so good, but we're just kind of jamming. And maybe it's actually good enough. We might want to maybe cut an album or go on tour, right? Which means we got a
Mm.
big project we want to do. But all that stuff I'm always excited about. I like to say if we're imagining anything that might be possible, let's look at it as something that's simple and something that's measurable, right? And let's just start there because we can boil the ocean. I mean, imagining that we can, right? All the things, right? I start getting excited. I can talk to you for 4 hours.
Oh, yeah, I know that feeling.
I want to be.
I do have another question for you, and then we can move on to the future. But first, you mentioned when you were co-founding with Tony that you sort of started these two organizations at the same time. Uh, and I'm also curious how your work intersects with open source. Like, what choices have you made about what to open source, what not to open source, and why? How are you served by that?
Wow, wow. Really great question. So up through about middle of this year, it was kind of like this walled garden thing. Like we might be using tools and these are our tools and it's going to be our thing. And I've come to this kind of point in my life right now. I'm going to hit the big 60 next year. And I'll just in the
Oh,
state of what's
congrats.
happening in the passing of my dear friend,
Mm.
that the value of this isn't for any one person to hold on to, right? And so when we look at it, at what we're doing, and I've been in some discussions right now, but the stuff at the edge or the terrestrial equipment, I can rewind back to like the 80s, the early 80s, where there were two platforms for the personal computer. One was the Apple Macintosh,
Mhm.
and the other was the PC. And the Mac, if you wanted to get a Mac, you had to go to Apple. And that's the kind of way ExoLab is today. It's like you got to go to Apple.
Mm.
But the PC had a different model. It was pretty much here's the standard, right? Build to the standard, and you can call yourself a PC. And so I'm thinking for 2023, and that's why I'm looking for an embedded engineer or engineers,
Mm.
she or they would be great to join us because they can then help me imagine what that's going to look like. There will be some keys to the kingdom, if you will, the APIs that we'll need to nest and also logically assign. If you're running a different type of CO2 sensor, I need that in our network. And when I look at what the researchers are trying to do, the big thing, of course, and something, I mean, I didn't do graduate work at all. I left art school to start a business in the 80s, right? So, but the currency for researchers, for graduate students, is writing a paper and getting cited, right? Getting
Mm.
grant money because they're doing this one really unique thing. And so reproducibility is a big challenge that people have when they do research. And so our network of science laboratories that are connected to the International Space Station are a proto network of separate science laboratories that I'd like to make one. And right now we started with the general education and we're kind of moving up the food chain into this post-flight
Mm.
research with hard X-ray tomography and single cell transcriptomics and other crazy stuff, nutrient delivery systems and other things that are just like, wow. And all I'm really trying to do is open up the door and then kind of move off to the side and provide the throughput. And as you mentioned, I'm serving as it's a volunteer role at the National Lab as an education chair, and we're looking at the pipeline. I'm looking at the pipeline and understanding how one can get stuff, assets on orbit and back again, how we can get them into the lunar trajectory, whether it's in a halo orbit with the gateway, or whether it's on the surface of the moon. Thinking back end of the decade into 2030s, can we get a couple kilos on the way to Mars? And just
Yes.
the point here and up is there are only three conjunctions remaining between now and the end of the decade. So that's like a train schedule, right?
Mm,
26
right.
months is when it's the most efficient when Earth and Mars are coming together. So when you booking your ticket, right? And what does it take to get the hardware ready to go, and how much does it cost? What do you need to do to underwrite it to get it going? But there are payloads that are going, and they're flying every 26 months, and the cadence is going to go up. And so if we can plan out into the late 20s, early 2030s, you can get something on the surface of Mars.
You mentioned this on your LinkedIn, like every 26 months ish, Earth and Mars
There
come
you go. Yeah, it
closer.
just happened, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so, and that window's open now for a few more months. But if it just
Cool.
becomes less fuel efficient, not to say you
Mhm.
can't do it, it'll take longer and you'll burn a lot more. A rocket today leaving the gravity of Earth, about 95% of that, maybe a little less, 94, maybe 93, is just propellant to get to Leo.
Right.
Right? Yeah, wow. And off the surface of the moon, well, you only have 1/6 of the gravity. So that's why we really want to do the Artemis project and get back to the moon. With that,
Cool.
you've got looking for the water ice. My friend there,
Oh, yeah!
One's in Kentucky at Morehead State. Professor Ben Malfris has the lunar ice cube. They're basically surveying part of Artemis. They were deployed, and they've got a 12U. I think is that they got up to that size now, equivalent in which they're looking for water ice in near the southern pole for possible mining operations.
Didn't
That's
they
all.
find there was, water trapped in, like, glass spheres or something up there? Or dirt
Yeah, well,
spheres?
it's in the regolith, and they just have to find first of all the
So
quality
cool.
and concentration. The big problem now, see, there's so many different problems with space, which is really cool.
Right.
Any domain that you're interested in, of course, the dust. It's very sharp and abrasive. It's like loose
Mm.
sandpaper, but worse than that, of course, you don't have weathering, so it really is. It's like glass, and it gets into everything in these microparticles.
Oh my
You
gosh.
don't want to breathe it, that's for sure.
Mm.
And so your spacesuit will start breaking down, your rover will start breaking down, your electronics will start breaking down.
Oof.
And then you have the extreme day-night temperature swings. Every 2 weeks you got blazing hot, and every 2 weeks you got extreme cold and systems shut down. And so there's some big problems that just need to solve just for the moon.
Dang. Uh, that is so cool. Well, speaking of the future,
Mhm.
let's dive into that. You mentioned before we started recording here that you're very interested in it, talking not so much about like through the end of 2023, but like into like 2050 and like the next half a century and like what it looks like us being in sort of the roaring 20s of the 21st century and what's going to come after this. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, where
Uh,
to go? I mean, pick anything. General artificial intelligence,
mm,
quantum computing, genetics. Yeah, it's just all fields right now are just advancing at this rapid clip. But I think context is really, really important. The longest known civilization are the Aboriginal, kind of coming out of Africa,
mm,
Central Australia. And what's fascinating about Aboriginal people is they lived very differently the way we modern humans live today. They moved just like the animals. They migrated, and they used the land until it was like, hold on, we're maybe losing a little bit too much. Let's move. And they had fire. They understood how to use fire and whatnot, and because the seeds would actually germinate from the fire, and they knew how to hunt animals and what have you.
mm,
40,000 years, right, of a civilization. And we measure what in decades, maybe. You think about like the world 100 years ago, right? But you just go back to like Egypt, right, or 4,000 years before that even happened, and so civilization's been around for what for humans anyway. It seems a very long time, but in the scale of the universe, billions of years old. It's like this. So if you're thinking about Mars, you really got to think about the year 2800 or something like that, right?
mm.
And so this is an ambitious and very important, and I'm not going to dissuade anyone from thinking about bringing that distant future into the present. But there are immediate things like just being good to each other. It's like, come on. A lot of this survival instinct I think we still have as humans is misplaced. That guy just cut me off on the road. Oh, I'm going to honk at him. I'm going to get angry. It's like, come on, man. You're still alive. Just take a deep breath. You're going at 80 miles an hour. You're going to get there. You're not walking at 3.5 miles an hour.
Yeah, and we're kind of, we're returning to finally start, people in power are finally starting to listen more to the people who
Mm,
are still around. Like, of course, indigenous peoples are still here, and many still practicing like native practices of land regeneration and management. And you're seeing more people. Like, I follow this person on Instagram, California Native Plants, who gives classes about things like the fire cycle and how the native grasses need this in
yeah.
order to regenerate and, I feel like yeah, that type of work is so instrumental right now
Mhm.
in, learning how to actually coexist with the planet and not just, like, impose one desired shape upon it
There you
when,
go.
like,
Yeah, wouldn't it be
it's not
cool if
sustainable.
you could interview like a dolphin? So tell
Oh,
me, Mr.
yeah!
Dolphin, what's on your mind today? Well, I ate fish this
Maybe
morning, and
soon.
it's kind of warming down there near Cabo San Lucas, but other than that, everything's kind of nice. But what's your take on there? Earthlings. There are many different types of earthlings, and I think we're over focused because we are
Oh,
humans.
absolutely.
There
Well,
are
with
8 billion
the
of us now, right, Alex? 8 billion humans.
Mm.
Wow.
Well, we have these I think a really cool thing going on right now that may seem unrelated, but we have these buttons that dogs are being trained to like step on buttons that like help them communicate what exactly they want. And it's like they can actually talk to us in a very limited way, but it's like they have a button for food and a button for like outside and whatever. And it's like you actually kind of communicate with them, well, like with words. And I think that like stuff like that has so much potential. And then also you geeking out about microbes. The potential of microbes is just mind blowing with their ability to break down plastics and like take CO2. And of course algae is like one of the largest carbon sinks and producers of oxygen on the earth, of course.
That's right.
Oh, it's so cool. And,
Well, you know what's really amazing when you start thinking about the trillions of cells that are working to make you. How
right.
many bacterias are also in there in your gut and other places that are just along for the ride, right?
We've
And
come a
without
long way
all
from
that
like
stuff working
bacteria
together,
bad to like
right? With all that stuff not working together, we're not healthy humans. And so, who is Ted? Who is Alex? But really, it's what is it, right? We're part of everything. And as I say, we're made of star stuff. The heavier elements like iron only could have occurred through an explosion of a supernova, which means, you look at the Fermi paradox. Where are we? Why aren't there anyone else? We're probably the earliest life forms that have evolved because of that. You had to go through a few cycles of stars before that stuff got sprinkled around the universe and we pick up. Otherwise, you just have a few elements, and not these heavier ones. And of course, they're really kind of things above iron, really kind of sophisticated elements. You get up to the man-made stuff in the 120, 130, whatever.
mm,
That's really fascinating. But so yeah, the universe is huge. How might we transcend, the flesh and blood we have? Who knows? I've always been on that for the longest time, but knowing that I do have a limited time, and probably good that I do because that gives you a pause for reflection and a desire to
mm.
actually get something done. If you could live forever, would you do anything? I'll do it tomorrow. It's like that's
Oh
I'm the
no,
type of attitude.
procrastination
I'd
to
do it
the max.
right. Right.
Oh no.
As
This
as they say, a project fills the time it's allotted,
yep.
right?
Yep,
If you
yep,
give
yep.
yourself a 2-year
It's
project,
like
it's
a
going to take
gas,
you
it will
nearly 2
expand
years.
to fill.
Yeah, I got a weekend to do this hack. And you know what? Wow, you got it done.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Isn't that wild?
Um,
Yeah.
it
So
really
just
is.
yeah.
And the stuff that we're talking about now, I find so inspiring, and it reminds me of Dr. Cyan Proctor. You've got it here on the ExoLab page, and
Mhm.
she was at the Analog Astronaut Conference. Thank you very much to my friend Mohib for inviting me to that, by the way.
Mohican.
And she talks about how this one of I forget who, but one of the first people to go into orbit said they should have sent poets when people were asking him like, what was it like up there? It's like they should have sent poets, and that's part of her mission is to like you know to bring that expression, and that's why she went on the mission. But like
Mhm.
I feel like that's what I'm getting from you here as well, is like you have this art
Well,
background, and it's just like this, it's so inspiring. um where we don't It's inspiring to be around people who have a laser focus as well, but also just like you can see and you're interested in the whole broad palette of what's out there and what the future could be, and focusing on that. Ah, it's amazing.
it is amazing, and there's just so much we can do, but we really have to work together. And
Mhm.
I tell the young people, with my colleagues and what have you, it's like finding the right synergy, right, the right element together, and you form your superhero squad or whatever, and you're going to get stuff done.
Mm.
If you can't bring people together, you can try to be independent, right, and you can go so far. But if you really want to tackle a really really big problem, you might have to think orthogonally the way you normally think, bring in someone that really has a different view.
Mm.
As I've gotten older, I was much more opinionated when I was younger. It's like I had it all figured out. I had maybe a few school of hard knocks there degrees where it's like I know very very little, and there's some people that are really really brilliant. So let me find that brilliant person that does that one thing, or a couple of brilliant people that can help me look at that problem, and then for me to kind of step back out of the way and not own it so much. So your question about open source, I think it's
Mm.
moving much more down that road, more about knowledge transfer, knowledge discovery and transfer rather than knowledge ownership. And one of the big hangups I have right now is intellectual property. With some of the advanced research that's going on up there, invariably someone wants to put an IP firewall up, basically saying, it's not going to get past this wall. And then, so what's the purpose of us doing this for learning? So there might be some demonstrable reason why, like a pharmaceutical company doesn't want that mechanism to be delivered, but more often than not, it's just general science. Let it free, right? Especially if you got federal grants or public money, then it definitely should be open, and you should see what's going on.
Yeah, which maybe has something to do with the structure of our whole academic system as well, where like in order to succeed and like sustain yourself, you have to sort of have these publications that are exclusive and like are prestigious because they're kind of exclusive and you know, there's so
Mhm.
much that we can do on a societal level to sort of improve the scientific trajectory and the creative trajectory of our
Yeah,
species.
we're in a gray zone, which is really quite comforting, actually. So we don't have to really appeal to the academia, right?
Mm.
From that perspective, and from like pure science and research, we don't need to do that as well. It's like let's play, and what are other people looking at, and how might we reinforce their work, right? But the idea is let's have some fun and let's bring people together, and let's also hear all those other voices. These missions that we're talking about, like ExoLab 10, and I will give a shout out to ExoLab 11 also in just a sec, but I like to say, we've got 10,000 paintbrushes. Grab a brush, help
Ah.
us kind of imagine what this is going to be. It's not like, here's your experiment in your 11th grade chemistry class, and this is what you have to do, titrations, blah blah blah, and this is the result you're supposed to get. And if you didn't get them, you did it wrong, right? Again, it's like that's like the major. Whereas the mission is like want to solve hunger, or you want to global climate change, climate action. So those are kind of the mission stuff, and you work on that path. I think is a better way to go for me anyway. I get excited about that.
Mm. We'd better wrap up here pretty quick.
Sounds good.
But you mentioned ExoLab 11.
Uh,
Uh,
okay. So yeah, ExoLab 11 will take pretty much the same form factor that we're now at, which is this 6U equivalent, or 30 centimeters by 20 by 10. And this is interesting. We're going to take it and divide it into three components. Basically, these two U's equivalent side by side by side, okay, in space. And the center console, if you will be for basically all of operations. Might have some fixative bags or some extra lighting or some other things we may need. On the one chamber on the right hand side or left hand, I guess on one side, is ExoLab 11 to be determined, right? But more than likely, we'll stick with plant biology.
mm,
There's some researchers down at University of Adelaide that we've been in conversation with. They're really excited about duckweed.
mm,
Just to throw that phrase out there, if anyone's interested in duckweed, give me a shout. We're going to need to use different systems to solve that. We've since mission 7, we've been following along with legumes, and with the state of this mission right now, we probably want to revisit that maybe. But on the other side, that last third remaining, this is really really interesting to me. This is the first time we're going to try to do this in Western Sydney, Australia, supported by an organization called the Powerhouse Museum. Powerhouse Museum is an institution there in Sydney. They've been around for 100 plus years. They're building a brand new 30,000 square meter museum in the western part of Sydney, out there in the Parramatta. Take the Parramatta River at the very end of Sydney Harbor, all the way out west. Powerhouse Parramatta is where it's being built, and that's
oh,
immigrants, Aboriginal, your underserved communities are out there. And what's interesting, also south of that, is something called Aerotropolis. They're building a
what?
24/7 airport with logistics facilities to serve the greater eastern part of the country, but also aerospace is really big. And their space agency is just 4 years old.
Wow.
These schools all around that museum are being funded and supported by the Langwalker Academy, which is a funded academy by a big successful real estate developer there in Australia, to do this kind of work. And so the day they cut the ribbon, was the concept, with the Powerhouse Museum. The students would have designed and have in operation in orbit a mission. And so we're close to that. We're probably going to have the mission concluded before they're done. They always get delays with the hardware. I mean, with the building of a building. So that's going to be open-ended design from the beginning. Like, how might you develop it? And through contests, we'll find a reference model, which we'll then have built. They actually won't build the hardware; they'll fly. We'll have a reference model because I want them to be successful, but they'll go through the whole design process, and then they'll walk through the preliminary and critical design reviews and the flight readiness with our engineers to make sure it's done right. And then, of course, it'll be operational February of 2024. That's a very
Wow.
short runway
Mm,
for space. But so by mid next year, end of June, we'll have our reference for building, and then we'll get to work. And around that same time, I'm hoping to have a revised prototype with ExoLab here on Earth, the
cool.
conversion. Yeah, there you
Well, thank you so much for
go.
this amazing conversation. Again, I
Yeah.
also agree with you. I think we could talk for like 3 more hours about this easily.
Mhm.
But I want to make sure that people know where to find more. All the links, of course, are going to be in the description to this video. Well, not all the links, but the main ones. We've got magnitude.io. We've got magnitude.io on Twitter. We've got Ted Tagami's LinkedIn. And also, December is Space Month on Hackster. Stay tuned for more cool stuff. And
Awesome.
and you're going to be doing more interviews with, you mentioned Katie and other folks who are doing.
Yeah, Dr. Joy Amasa, and also
Yes.
there's a wonderful engineer, Jacob Torres, who actually I think would be great for your show.
Ooh.
Jacob has a. I'm not going to steal his thunder, but if you go 2 episodes back on our YouTube,
Oh,
you can listen to him speak. Coming out of a farming community in northern New Mexico, right on a chili farm, worked his way through it. You know, kind of in and out of school. Decides he's going to go to community college. Ends up building diesel engines. Ending up getting a master's degree. Deciding he's going to apply for an internship at NASA. He's working at NASA. He's actually brought his chilies from New Mexico to the research lab Veggie, and it's one of the most successful outreach programs that NASA's had, growing these chilies. And he's got an open-ended kind of engagement with people doing measurement and stuff like that. So
wow.
it's the Chili Pepper Challenge, Jacob Torres, and I can always send you a reference for that if you want to reach out and talk to him. He's an engineer through and through, and he can walk you through. If you watch that video,
Uh-huh.
right, he's going to walk you through the lab
Oh, wow.
and talk right there. Yeah, you're in NASA, and he does the whole walkthrough, and he walks in all the labs. He's talking about the stuff he's working on. Anyone that's watching this video through that video is going to be fired up and probably want to talk to Jacob too.
All
He's a
right.
wonderful inspiration. Yeah,
Oh, that's so cool.
yeah.
Thank you again, Ted. This has
Thank
been
you. I
awesome.
appreciate you
And
reaching out.
we'll see you in 4 years again, if not before.
All
Hopefully
right.
before, but
How's
you
that?
know,
Yeah.
we'll see.
With before the next two conjunctions to Mars. How's that sound?
How about, all right, deal.
I'll put it on my celestial calendar.
Okay. Cheers,
Right on, Alex.
everybody. Have an awesome rest of your day. Join us for more and hack on.
Right.